Hey, this is Doug Underhill, County Commissioner, District 2 here in Escambia County, and we've just gotten our condos open again. Looks like most of businesses are coming back open. It's going to be a long time before we recover from the financial fallout of the bad decision making that came with coronavirus. But now's a good time for us to really start doing the after action report and really self-assessing what did we as a society get wrong and how did we get it so wrong that we really shut down and destroyed 3 years of great economic progress over a disease that really was not ever going to be the threat that we were told it was going to be. I don't think anybody anybody who lives through this time will ever be able to see these two lines and not know immediately what this is supposed to be. Now, I'll tell you right now, my detractors are going to immediately start saying things like, well, you're not a doctor, how do you know, what right do you have to have an opinion? Look, this is not a medical problem. This issue and what we did to the nation and what we did to our county in the state of Florida is not a medical issue. It was bad decision making based on really bad analysis. I do have almost 30 years with the federal government as an analyst in some of the most exciting times of our nation's history, doing intelligence analysis at some of the highest levels. So I'm going to apply some of that and talk a little bit about the tradecraft of analytics that could have prevented us from going down this path. One of the things that I often hear people say, leaders will stand up and they'll say, well, according to the models, this is going to happen. When you hear any elected official or any leader saying, according to the models, this will happen, you are listening to somebody who does not understand modeling and simulation. So ModSim is a tradecraft that was created primarily by the military as a means to exercise the decision-making process, to create scenarios whereby leaders would have to think through really hard decisions. ModSim is designed to exercise the decision-making process, not replace it. When you hear a leader say, the models say such and such, you are listening to a leader who does not understand his job as a decision maker. Modeling and simulation can be used to create whatever scenario you want. And it's kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch, you can flip it over and turn it upside down and shake it real hard and start the whole decision-making process again with different assumptions. And assumptions is the important word here. When we saw this, and I'm sure that everybody already understands what it is, but we'll go ahead and run through it. This is the spike that was expected as people got sick with coronavirus. This was called flattening the curve. If we could achieve this instead of that, then life would be good. Why? Because of something, this sort of line that was really kind of created arbitrarily. Nobody ever told us how they got to determine what this line was, but they called this line the level at which our hospitals would be able to handle the problem. So we created this line that was really kind of arbitrary, and then we started making decisions to try to keep this, which we assumed was going to happen, but we based that on assumptions that were never really sound, and we were going to try to create this reality. Now, there are a couple of assumptions that go into this that we knew to be wrong the very first time that you saw this on TV. First of all, this whole thing is designed based on the assumption that this line right here is day 0 and patient 0. There was never any evidence of that. In fact, there was a strong body of evidence that many people had gotten sick long before what the government is still telling you is day 0, patient 0 of coronavirus in America. If you set this line and we say that 0 people had the disease here and therefore 100% of people are susceptible to it, then that's a necessary predication on the idea that this ramp could happen. See, because if on this day 25% of Americans had already had it and therefore couldn't get it again, nor could they give it to somebody else, then this ramp up can't happen. So there's assumption number 1, that this was day 0, patient 0. We know that not to be true. This disease was running fairly rampant out here in November and December. But we also know that most people who had it either had symptoms that required them to stay, that they were able to handle staying at home, or they were asymptomatic but had it. Now, think about that. We knew all the way back here that some people had the disease and did not require hospitalization. In fact, we knew way back here that most people who got it did not have symptoms and did not require hospitalization. So for some reason, we forgot that fact when we created this. See, for this spike to be all scary the way they wanted it to be, that assumes that all of these people would require hospitalization. Because remember that this line is that threshold at which the hospital system would fail. We already knew that this wasn't true the very first time that we put this graph in front of you. We knew it to be wrong. Now, the other thing that we knew to be wrong, now, based on that idea, that we knew then that most people that got the disease would not require hospitalization. We knew back then that many people had already had it and therefore could not spread it. We knew that information, but we put this scary thing in front of you anyway, and we taught you to be afraid based on this science, based on this model, saying this is what the model is going to do. Now, modeling and simulation never says this is the future. Modeling simulation does not equal fortune telling. But ever since the Al Gore era, when he started talking about global warming and the models say we're all going to be underwater in X number of years, I think by now this Pensacola would have been underwater. Starting with that era, politicians started bastardizing modeling and simulation. And unfortunately, a lot of the tradesmen within modeling and simulation realized that there was a lot of money in creating scary little graphs like this, and there wasn't as much money in running the exercises that teach leaders how to be good decision makers. So it is what you have seen take place, and what I really hope comes out of the coronavirus crisis, if there's anything that we learn from this, this should be the death of politicians being able to use modeling and simulation to create a fear scenario to tell you that they know the future, and then to start spending money or creating these incredible violations of our liberties based on that fear. Okay? Again, anytime that you hear a politician or a leader talking that the models say this, the first question you have to ask is, sir, please tell me about the model. What are the assumptions that went into the model? What are the for what period of time did you study the model? Did you run other models with different assumptions? In modeling and simulation tradecraft, you run model after model, scenario after scenario. And you also recognize that, quite frankly, no matter how many times you run the model, just because it's the way Murphy's Law works, whatever actually does happen and the challenge that the leader gets faced with is going to be something different than the model. Now, here on the Gulf Coast, which we also know as the Hurricane Coast, we as citizens already know this, which makes it even more surprising to me that Gulf Coast citizens actually bought into this garbage. Because the first minute that a hurricane starts to present itself in the Gulf, the first thing we see are the spaghetti models. Well, the spaghetti model, for those not on the Gulf Coast, all these different people who do modeling, they're looking at the exact same data sets. They're just as capable as the next guy in tradecraft of modeling, and they run their models, and the models for where the hurricane's going to go are all over the Gulf Coast. Now, that should tell you right there that there's no such thing as a model that's going to tell you what the future is. The models tell you what any one of the infinite number of possibilities of the future are. And if you've lived on the Gulf Coast for any period of time, we call those spaghetti models because the lines of where the hurricane's going to go are just all over the entire Gulf, and it looks like a big bowl of spaghetti. So the reality is, the storm actually goes somewhere else. It very rarely follows any of those models. So if you think about that, you've got 20 professional modelers looking at the exact same data set and saying that within the next 7 or 8 days this hurricane is going to go on this path. All 20 modelers come up with different lines, and somehow we're supposed to believe in this case that we've got one model, and that one model is taken as gospel. Guys, we've got to stop letting our leaders do this to us. We have to stop letting our politicians sell us on fear. This was nothing but selling fear. It was never based on sound tradecraft of analytics. When we start getting into, God, I was absolutely lambasted when I first started saying, I don't think it's really going to work the way they said it was. We started seeing, especially from the liberal press, just lambaste me for not believe. You don't have a medical degree, so how can you say that anything? How can you even have an opinion? You need to let the professionals do this. Well, professional doctors are not professionals in public policy. They are not professionals in how to make your budget at home work when you don't have a job for 9 weeks, 10 weeks, however long it is. Okay? Those medical professionals should have stayed in their very, very, very important but very distinct sphere of influence and should not have been manipulating data and fear to create a scenario whereby we would shut down the economy. So I hope that it's given some indication as to really kind of what we, that when you see these kind of graphs, when you see this kind of modeling and simulation tradecraft misused as propaganda, that you'll be one of those people who stands up and asks the question of that leader. Keep in mind, as a free society, it's not your job to believe the government. In fact, you should always not believe the government. Whatever they tell you, you should ask hard questions. The burden of proof is on the government to prove to us that they know what the hell they're talking about. And if they can't handle some simple questions from the audience, from an average Joe, if they're unwilling to answer those questions, then it's probably because they either don't understand what they're saying or they're not telling you the truth. It's our duty as citizens to ask those hard questions. So I'm hoping that maybe from this, if 1 or 2 more people will stand up and ask the hard question when the government is telling you that we need to shut down for silly reasons like this, 1 or 2 more people stand up. That's all it's going to take each time. If 1 or 2 more stand up each time, then government will be less likely to make these radical violations of our liberties for no other reason than creating fear. Thanks a lot.